Tatsmewi inem latua, tatsmewi oikalo, inem unitwa satit watit, soyapa unitwas, Ty Simpson, inwas nimi puayet, inem nexasa hiwis timina ilp kanich, laloitzat kina, tax hiwis tats, katsiat yachanyuat. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are in week 3, day 6 of the MMIP conference, hosted by the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. I have a lot of gratitude that you all are joining us this morning. I told you that my name is the Storyteller. I told you that I am a citizen of the Nez Perce Nation, and I told you that I'm happy to be here, and I'm very thankful that Creator has allowed us to show up in a good way. I noticed that over the course of our time together that some of this material can be very heavy, so I want to acknowledge that and honor you all for being here and staying with us as we navigate some of these very difficult conversations. But in order for us to do that, I think that it's important to invite an elder into our space and offer the invocation to keep us grounded, keep us connected to each other virtually, and keep a reminder of why we're here and for and to keep the relatives who are impacted by this violence close to our hearts. We are honored to have Merceline Boyer from the Shoshone-Bannock Nations join us this morning to offer our invocation. Merceline, when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to do this. It's it's an honor. And I'm a member of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. I'm working with the Language and Cultural Preservation Department for our tribes, and I'm the lead language instructor. And today I'll offer the prayer in our Shoshone language, as I can speak that better in the Bannock. So bear with me as I pray for all of us. Hamaikanasua and the me when I pan make. Ik make skandami make the Mugatianga voice make on me and Sunday. Sandy Quizon I put ni way kind of make on us so white. Sukanami younger Sunday and oh, you're going to manana when I target to know the Yana Hijagang. Oh, your audition to hide make on us so white. Ikadas Namasogobia, the Mambuhaba, Sikadas Namission to hide and the Michael. Pamanamaguis on I can. Tangomana, what in the Maguis on I made or I make. So goes nights away at swag on an anchors in the high kind of make. Now, so I me when I punt. Iknamanana Rodona, Naman did a head in all your audition behind. Tango, my good and Nana Mero, Hina Uda Sumbaro Mero, so goes the nation nights away can. Sukan and Nangasundain. Quite good as Naman did and I make. Namananai and Uwagant or the Mugway go ek Sudida Sudishun the Heinhike. Tango the Mugway Sudishun the Heinke and the Wake. Tango or the Nana when I Ulka or the Nasundawa Mer or Hamek Sukota Sudishun the Hein Usuaiko so nights awake and Sukamek Tango the Hina Nana the Mer or her Sukos nights awake. Like so economy should I know like now sugan and wouldn't there's Namanda Kappa. He and Puma Namaguiz on I can so come I could as the mission to high come I can ask sugan. The Mandu so I to the yan I jacanco. Remabando the Odi Kitaudi Haka make Sudi their solution to high I can ask sugan. Also, we know in Hina like oil, like the Pumanamang Wizon I can, the Mandicap, the Man Ika Siak and the make in oil, like so goes the nights awake and like so I can Sunday and like so I know me when I punt make. Also, we can on take what I had to make a zanguda in a knock and I make so goes the nights away so I can a young Sudan. Also, so we got for all my relations.
Kamakas Katsia'aya for that, Merceline. We really appreciate you joining us, and you're certainly loved and honored and revered as an elder in our community, both in your own home community and across the state., so. Thanks again for joining us this morning. I want to, before I jump further into facilitation, acknowledge that we are broadcasting our virtual conference from the unceded ancestral lands of the Burns Paiute tribe, the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, the Fort McDermott Paiute and Shoshone tribes, and the Shoshone Paiute tribes of Idaho, and the Shoshone Bannock tribe of Idaho. We'd also like to recognize that Idaho is established on the unceded ancestral territory of the Kootenai tribe, the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and the Nez Perce tribe as well. Our event today is sponsored by the Idaho Coalition Against Sexual and Domestic Violence. We are co-sponsored by the Idaho Council on Domestic Violence and Victim Assistance, and we have received some support from the United States Department of Justice. I'm really excited that we've made it to week 3. We've spent the first 2 weeks of October really diving deep into historical context about our work to address violence in Indigenous communities. We've dug deep into understanding data and methodology. We've started to give you some tools and framework to building community with Native folks. If you are an advocate, if you are a victim service provider, even if you're an educator or somebody just looking to be our partner in addressing some of these issues, we gave you some framework for that. So week three is really about digging deep into practical and contemporary solutions. We have several grassroots organizers, families, victim families that I would like to honor and acknowledge in our space. And I will do that every session as much as I can, that none of this work is possible if it were not for the tireless efforts of families impacted by violence and impacted by the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples epidemic that we're facing across Indian country. This week, though, let's talk about some of these contemporary solutions. The efforts start as grassroots and then naturally evolve into policy, into legislation, into task force building. And so these systems that we're exploring this week and these conversations that we're having will be to that facet of this work. And when we say that, we say, like, what systems are currently in place? Are they working? What questions can we ask? How can they be improved? So today is the NamUs training. Tomorrow will be about Amber Alert in Indian country, and then the legislation that fueled that. And then Thursday is a really important opportunity for all of us to ask questions of our law enforcement officers as they are boots on the ground. They are the first line of attack, so to speak, when it comes to finding our missing relatives or addressing violence in our communities. So that conversation, you're still able to submit your questions for that, and I encourage you to do so. And then we have representation from the Nez Perce Tribal Police, from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, from the City of Boise Police Department, Criminal Defense Unit, Criminal Investigation Unit. And then we have somebody representing the Idaho State Police in these conversations. So we know that the solutions have to be collaborative and interagency, but we also need to hold these agencies to account when it comes to missing information, when it comes to lack of communication. We have a lot of questions in communities. So let's use this opportunity this week to really drive solution building, solution-oriented focus on how we can continue to work towards bringing our relatives home. So with that, I'm really excited to introduce Jessica Hager from the NamUs system. I'm see if I can remember that entire acronym. It is the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. Jessica is our regional overseer for Alaska, Idaho, Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota, Oregon, South Dakota, Washington, and Wyoming. So that's a huge region. So I hope we're not spreading you too thin, and we're really excited to have you here. I'll go ahead and pass it to you, Jessica, to introduce yourself. You are still muted, just as an FYI. We can see your screen, so you're successful in sharing your screen.
Great. Just making sure everything's set up correctly here.
Awesome.
Okay. So you can see my screen and hear me okay?
We sure can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ty. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for today's webinar and to learn more about the NamUs program. We're happy to be included in this conference, and I hope that by the end of my session, you will have a better understanding of what NamUs is and the resources that we have to offer on missing and unidentified person cases. As Ty mentioned, my name is Jessica Hager, and I'm the Regional Program Specialist for NamUs for the state of Idaho, which basically means I'm your main point of contact for anything NamUs related. But before I get too far into anything, I just want to put our disclaimer out there and note that the contents of today's webinar was created by myself. So any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed today are my own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Institute of Justice or any component of the National Institute of Justice. So for those of you who may not be as familiar with NamUs, it is a national information clearinghouse and resource center for missing, unidentified, and unclaimed person cases across the United States. We are funded and administered by the National Institute of Justice and managed through a cooperative agreement with the University of North Texas Health Science Center in Fort Worth, Texas. And all of the NamUs resources and everything that I talk about today are provided at no cost to law enforcement, medical examiners, coroners, allied forensic professionals, and the family members of missing persons. So there are over 600,000 people who are reported missing every year in the United States. But fortunately for many of those people, they are found very quickly, alive and well. But there are still anywhere between 80 and 90,000 active missing person cases on any given day in the US. And it's estimated that around half of those individuals have been missing for longer than 1 year or are considered a cold case. For the unidentified side, there are over 12,000 active cases in the United States. And it's estimated that there are approximately 4,000 new cases every year. And of those 4,000, around 1,000 remain unidentified after 1 year. So these numbers are staggering, and the sheer volume of missing person cases poses one of the greatest challenges to the agency's tasked with locating missing persons. And for those families of the missing, these numbers are just heartbreaking. So it was in 2005 that the National Institute of Justice defined the key challenges involved with working these types of cases and what was needed to work them better. And they developed NamUs to meet that need. So the National Institute of Justice identified the resources needed by local, state, tribal, and federal law enforcement agencies to resolve cases, as well as the need for better tools to communicate case information across jurisdictional boundaries. So based on the feedback of all stakeholders involved in these important cases, including the families of the missing, the NamUs program was created. So NamUs combines people, information, technology, and forensic services to resolve cases while also providing support to families impacted by the death or disappearance of a loved one. And with the development of our NamUs Research and Evaluation Division, NamUs utilizes data to create system improvements and provide investigators with information to better understand and respond to missing and unidentified person cases. So who uses NamUs? And actually anyone can use NamUs. That's what makes this program so great and what makes us different from other law enforcement programs. So not only do law enforcement personnel and the medical legal community have access to NamUs, but also the family and friends of the missing, victim advocates, and even the general public or concerned citizens can enter cases, see cases in the system, and be more involved in the cases. And what a powerful tool that is. especially for the families who want to help. I've worked with so many families over the years, and when their loved one goes missing, they just want a job to do. They just want to help, to do anything to bring their loved one home. And they want to be involved in their case. And NamUs gives them the opportunity to do that. So our mission at NamUs and our hope is that by bringing people, information, the sciences, and technology together, that we can help resolve more missing, unidentified, and unclaimed person cases throughout the United States. And we hope to do that through our core services. And all of these I'll talk a little bit more about throughout my slides. But just quickly, they include our nationwide information clearinghouse. This is our online database. It's free, it's secure, and it's easy to use, and it's available for anyone to use. Our core services also include our free of charge forensic services, including forensic odontology, fingerprint examinations, as well as forensic anthropology and DNA analysis through the University of North Texas. We also provide investigative support. We have analysts on staff who can conduct searches and assist law enforcement agencies on their missing person cases. And we have a victim services unit who is available to connect families of missing persons to victim resources. And then we also offer training and outreach. So just doing events and webinars like this, as well as various training events throughout the country, although we're somewhat limited these days with COVID, but we want to make sure that people know what NamUs is and what resources we can offer. So NamUs was created in 2007, so we've been around for about 13 years now, and I like to think that we've come a long way since it first started. So there are now 10 different states that require NamUs entry for missing and unidentified person cases. So the states that have passed legislation already include Arkansas, Illinois, Michigan, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Washington, and West Virginia. And there are a number of other states in talks or drafting similar bills. And I think this is just a great step forward. And I believe until that we have all of these cases in the system, can we start making more connections and providing those resolutions to families. But we know there are still people and agencies who have never heard of NamUs. And that's why in the last couple of years, we have focused a lot of training and outreach to tribal law enforcement, to leaders and to communities across the country. Raising this awareness has increased the use of NamUs by tribal communities, which in turn is allowing NamUs to provide better data on missing Indigenous persons. So grassroots efforts have significantly increased awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous women, or MMIW, as well as missing Indigenous person cases in general. However, one consistent message cuts across all of these efforts. We don't yet know how many missing Indigenous person cases exist because we are not yet seeing all of the cases in one system. So in 2018, North Dakota Representative Ruth Buffalo stated at a Senate subcommittee hearing on MMIW, during that testimony, she stated that without data, there is no clear evidence that a problem exists. With the help of tribal law enforcement and tribal communities across the country, NamUs can be a solution to the data gap in missing Indigenous person cases so that we have a clear understanding of the problem. And ensuring that every missing Indigenous person is entered into NamUs, we're also ensuring that every available resource is dedicated to finding answers for those searching families and bringing their missing loved one home. So I have a few stats here for you. So due to a large part to outreach efforts and data import projects between NamUs and agencies such as the Alaska Missing Person Clearinghouse and the New Mexico Department of Public Safety, we have seen a significant increase in the number of long-term missing Indigenous person cases being entered into NamUs. So last month alone, we received over 40 new case entries that were published in NamUs for long-term missing Indigenous persons. We know we don't have every case though, and that's why we continue to do events like this, just making sure people know about NamUs, and that hopefully by working together, we can see that number continue to increase. And these efforts will allow NamUs to provide better statistics on the numbers of missing Indigenous persons. So just to break it down a little further, these are the cases that we have in the system as of October 1st, 2020. So currently we have 669 published missing person cases that have been listed as American Indian or Alaska Native from 34 different states. So Alaska does have the highest number of published cases in NamUs with 280 cases. And I mentioned on the previous slide that we just did a data import with Alaska State Missing Person Clearinghouse. And we entered around 700 long-term cases into NamUs. And they included all races and ethnicities, but that is why you're seeing that spike in the state of Alaska. Other top states, though, include Oklahoma, Arizona, Washington, New Mexico, and California. And then we have 4 cases out of Idaho. And if that number doesn't sound right to you all that are listening, please let me know. I urge you to look at the database after we're done today. And if you see cases, or if you see the cases that we have listed, and you know that someone's missing that's not on our list, whether you're just your family or you're a concerned citizen, or if there's any law enforcement on the line, please reach out to me and I can make sure that that case is entered. And not just Idaho, I know we have people tuning in from other states. So that goes for you all as well. If there is a case that's not listed in NamUs that you think should be, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And then just breaking these numbers down a little bit more, the top graph shows the missing person cases by length of case. We're seeing that 89% of the cases involving American Indian or Alaska Native, the person has been missing longer than 1 year. And this runs pretty consistent with the overall cases in NamUs. So we primarily receive reports of long-term missing person cases, with around 95% of the cases entered into NamUs have been missing for longer than 1 year. So the bottom graph shows the breakdown of sex and age the person went missing. So currently in NamUs, we're seeing that 70% of the cases involving American Indian or Alaska Natives are male and 30% are female. And we're seeing that around 50% of the cases, the person went missing between the ages of 21 and 40. On the unidentified side, we currently have 141 unpublished unidentified person cases that have been listed as American Indian or Alaska Native from 28 different states. And you'll see the highest number of cases is out of Arizona with 31 cases. And then other top states include California, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Alaska. And it looks like there is that 1 case out of Idaho. So I'm going to take a break from stats for a little bit, and I want to get into our technology. And I like to say that NamUs is so much more than a database, but it really is the first experience that most users have with the NamUs program. So I want to make sure that you all know how to find the website, how to register, how to enter cases, and how to use our advanced search features. But first, I do want to note that the NamUs database is searchable by anyone. However, sensitive case data is locked and can only be viewed by registered and vetted criminal justice personnel. And I like to point this out because if, as family, if you're entering your loved one as missing, you're likely providing some private information about them, such as date of birth or possibly medical history, maybe mental health information or criminal history. And I want you to know that that information will not be seen by the public. It'll only be seen by criminal justice users who have been vetted access to secure data. But one of the great aspects of NamUs is that it has created one central online repository where agencies, families, and concerned citizens can all participate in resolving cases. There are currently more than 19,000 active missing person cases and over 13,000 unidentified decedent cases currently published in NamUs right now. So public users have access to dates, locations, demographic information, unique characteristics like marks and tattoos, and even descriptions of clothing, jewelry, and accessories. So having access to this data allows families to perform searches for characteristics that match their missing loved one. Public users have even reported tips based on NamUs searching, which have led to resolutions of cases. So anyone can explore NamUs even without registering for the system by clicking Explore NamUs from our main page at www.namus.gov. But there really are benefits to registering for a NamUs account. So public users are family members of missing persons, they're volunteers, they're staff from missing person advocacy groups, and the general public. So for the public, registering allows you to make primary entry of a missing person into NamUs. So NamUs staff will then verify that case with the appropriate criminal justice agency prior to publishing it in the system. But friends and family can provide invaluable information to assist with the search for this missing loved one by making those entries. Registering also allows you to track cases and to search and view all publicly visible information in the NamUs case files. Professional users such as local, state, and tribal law enforcement officers can also register for professional access to NamUs. And this allows them to see information restricted to criminal justice users. So information such as dental radiographs, fingerprint cards, or other case-sensitive information within the entry. If you are on the line as law enforcement and you're registering as a professional user, you'll see that you'll be asked to enter a sponsor. This is typically your direct supervisor or commanding officer. I will then follow up with your sponsor to verify your employment. And this just goes back to that protection of case-sensitive information. To register with NamUs, you can, I have the little arrow up there. You just visit www.namus.gov/registration, and then you will select your user type. So for public users, you will select user type, public user, and click begin registration. And then it's a very basic few steps. You'll provide a login email, password, security question, and then provide some basic contact information about yourself, accept the privacy policy in terms of use, click register, and then you're ready to go.
Hi, Jessica. Sorry to interrupt you. We did have
Sure.
some questions that were kind of time sensitive, like regarding the time sensitive to your content anyway.
Oh,
so,
sure. Go right ahead.
So you had one question, I think it was back on one of your maps about the number of missing persons in Alaska. So why that number was so high. And then there's also a more recent question about what is the vetting process in response to using the system, I'm assuming. And then the third question, are there resources, I'm assuming, are there resources available to get copies of missing, like the missing persons posters, so that the families and communities can create awareness? So, I mean, at your leisure, if you want to answer those.
Yeah, so starting with Alaska. So I work real closely with Malia Miller. She's the Alaska missing person clearinghouse manager with Alaska State Troopers. And she recently helped us do a data import of over 700 cases that were more of those long-term cases that weren't entered into NamUs. So everything, we had a lot of the more recent cases, but there was that backlog of older cases that she helped import in. So because there were so many, it covered all races, but it did encompass more cases that we didn't have in the system that were listed as Alaska Native. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it had a large part due to the data import that we recently worked on. And the second question was the vetting process. Okay, so for professional users, if you register as a law enforcement officer, or if you're with the medical examiner's office or coroner's office, you will indicate that when you register, and then you're providing the name, title, and email address for your direct supervisor. So if you're a detective, you would provide your sergeant's information, and then the system is built to send email notification to them, which they have to respond to and click that they are allowed access to the NamUs case sensitive information. And that's once they get that approval, then the professional access will be granted to them. And then hopefully that answers that question. And then the third one had to do with, the posters, was that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so once the case is listed on the NamUs website, once it's been reviewed and published on the website, there is a section to click and create a poster. So you can print that or have a digital copy that you can share, and that can help it to bring in leads on that case. And I don't think I do have a screenshot here, but if I see something throughout my slides that points that out, I can point to where that poster can be found.
Excellent. Thank you for taking it.
Okay. Hopefully I got everything there, but feel free to break back in if people have more questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, so once you are registered and logged into NamUs, you'll find that the system is very simple to use. Users will be taken to a central dashboard that contains all of the NamUs tools in one place. So from this dashboard, you can search through missing, unidentified or unclaimed person cases. You'll see the little magnifying glasses on the top. That's where you can run any of those searches. You'll also be able to view any queues of the cases that you have entered or cases that you are tracking. So if you have an interest in a case that you want to track, you can track those cases and you'll find those on your dashboard as well. And this is also where you'll be able to enter a new case, which you can do so by clicking Add Missing Case on the top right corner of your screen. So after clicking on that, you'll be taken to a simple short entry form where you can provide basic information about your missing person to create a draft case in NamUs. And you'll see the gray box on the right. You'll find some tips to create and submit a missing person case. And then once you've entered your basic information, you can click Create Draft on the bottom of the screen. So once the draft case is created, the user is taken to their full case entry form where they can continue updating data until they are ready to submit the case for review. And I'm going to move my arrow and hopefully it works here. But do you see this tools here? If you click on that, that's where you'll find the poster. So for that person that asked, you should be able to find the poster options by going to tools. So the system will guide you to enter the minimum information needed to submit the case to NamUs, as you see in the highlighted orange bars on the top of the case. So by clicking on that box, the system will direct you to what information is still required. But we recommend, though, that even if it's not a required field, to enter as much information as possible on your missing person. This may help to bring in leads or generate proposed matches by the system. And I do want to point out again that anyone can enter a missing person into NamUs, and that includes family members, victim advocates, and the general public. But all cases must have a missing person report filed with law enforcement, and we need permission from the investigating agency to publish the case on the website for public viewing. But if there is any family on the line and you have a loved one missing and a missing person report has not yet been filed, please don't hesitate to enter the case into NamUs. If you're having troubles filing a report, or if you just have questions about the process, I can work with you to answer any questions, and I'm happy to act as a liaison if needed with the law enforcement agency. The case will just remain in pending status until that report can be filed. Once published, though, it is viewable to the public, and then if any leads or information comes in on the case, I then forward those to the investigating agency for any necessary follow-up. So I won't show you every section of the case file today, but you'll find that it contains sections for every piece of information that exists for a missing or unidentified person, from the circumstances of disappearance to demographics to any unique physical or medical characteristics. So here you will see you have the option to add if your missing person has any tattoos or scars, or to note what clothing they were last known to be wearing. There's also a section to note any medical information. So have they had any prior surgeries or past broken bones, or do they have medical implants, those kind of things. This can be very helpful for forensic identifications, and should that be needed. And then there's also sections of NamUs dedicated to the storage of biometric information, such as dental information, fingerprint cards, or the availability of DNA profiles in CODIS. So these are private sections of NamUs, but when you are creating the case as a family member or a victim advocate, if you know the person has ever been fingerprinted, or you know their last known dentist, you're able to enter that information at case entry. And that information is very helpful for me to know because it directs me to follow up with the investigating agency to make sure I can get those records entered into NamUs. So NamUs also allows for the upload of any type of image, from facial photos of the missing to photos of tattoos, to commonly worn jewelry, clothing they were last known to be wearing, or the vehicle they were last known to be driving. All of these types of images can be added to a case file to enhance the case and possibly bring in more leads. And you'll notice that the badge icon is on some of the photos, and that indicates that it's marked for professional view only. So private documents typically include those fingerprint records or dental records, or any other information that the investigating agency may not want listed as publicly viewable. So now I want to touch on the tribal fields that you'll see when you're entering a case. I'm sure that many of you are aware or have heard of Savannah's Act. In 2017, the then Senator Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota introduced a bill for Savannah's Act, named after the 22-year-old Spirit Lake tribe woman who was 8 months pregnant when she was murdered by her neighbor. And the purpose of this bill is to increase coordination among all levels of law enforcement, to increase data collection and information sharing, and to empower tribal governments with the resources they need in cases involving missing and murdered Indigenous persons. So recognizing our potential to be part of the increased data collection, the National Institute of Justice launched an update of NamUs back in December 2018 to add tribal data fields to missing and unidentified person cases. So these updates were made in collaboration with the Bureau of Indian Affairs and based on feedback from tribal leaders who wanted better tools to track members of their tribe who go missing. So this update to NamUs now allows users to indicate if a missing person is enrolled in or affiliated with a state or federally recognized tribe. So if the race or ethnicity of the missing person is noted to be American Indian or Alaska Native, their tribal enrollment or affiliation can be added through the 4-step process shown on the screen. So once it's noted that the tribe is state or federally recognized, the user can select from a pre-populated list of tribes based on the state. So once this data is entered, it is visible within the demographics section of the NamUs case file. And I mentioned that the update was in December 2018. So we've been gathering this information for almost 2 years now, but the fields weren't automatically populated for any cases entered prior to 2018. So we've been slowly working to update those cases and to get those fields added on those older cases. So another field that was added in the upgrade was the ability to note if the person went missing from tribal land or if the primary residence was on tribal land. Similarly, for the unidentified decedent cases, it can be noted whether the remains were found on tribal land. So once published, this data is visible in the circumstances section of the case file. And again, this information is from December 2018 and going forward, unless we've been able to go back and fill those fields. So I have a few more stats for you. So these are the numbers we are seeing in regards to the tribal data fields. And again, keep in mind that this data excludes cases with no related tribal information entered into NamUs. And like I mentioned, when the tribal data field were added, the system did not automatically update those fields on cases that were previously entered into NamUs. So we are having to go back and work with the agencies and the families to get those fields updated. But this is what we have in the system so far. So missing from tribal land, 38% of the cases indicate the person is not missing from tribal land, and 14% are missing from tribal land. And then we have 48% listed as unknown. And we're seeing that 68% of the cases note that the missing person does not reside on tribal land, and 22% do reside on tribal land, and then 15% is unknown. And then regarding the tribal enrollment and affiliation, we're seeing that 74% of the cases are marked that the information is unknown, and 23% are listed as being enrolled or affiliated with a tribe. And then lastly, we're seeing that 15% of the cases involving American Indian or Alaska Native missing persons are being investigated by a tribal agency, and then 85% is a non-tribal agency. On the unidentified person side, we're seeing that 68% of the cases remains are not found on tribal land, and 7% of the cases remains were found on tribal land. We're also seeing that with 95% of the unidentified cases, the investigating agency is non-tribal. Most of the unidentified cases in NamUs, though, are entered by medical examiners and coroners' offices, so we don't always have a law enforcement agency attached to the unidentified cases. But again, as we continue to get more cases in the system and update the cases that we already have, hopefully we'll continue to get a clearer picture of that data. And if you visit www.namusinfo.org, the link is listed there on the screen. Under special projects, we now have a section dedicated to our support for missing Indigenous person cases. And all the stats and the graphs that I showed you throughout the presentation, you can now go to this page and locate, view, and download the monthly data that we have in NamUs. And I just want to mention too, I brought up Savannah's Act earlier. It was signed into law on October 9th, a couple of weeks ago now. And the law calls for NamUs to develop and implement new outreach, awareness, and training programs for tribal law enforcement and communities, which we will be doing in collaboration with the Operation Lady Justice Task Force. So I'm not sure our exact role at this time, but we're looking forward to learning more about those efforts and those expectations from us. And also just another a site for you. If you leave here today and forget everything I said about entering a missing person case, you can visit namus.gov, and there is a step-by-step guide for entering cases. There's also a guide for the advanced searches in NamUs, which I'll touch on in just a couple slides here. But first, I did want to go over the unidentified person database. So this database contains information about unidentified decedents, and it is publicly searchable. The records are entered only by medical examiners, coroners, or their authorized designees. So the public can't enter cases into this database, but again, it is searchable by anyone. And this database is very similar to the information that's collected for missing persons. So we're gathering the demographic information, the circumstances of when and where the body was found, any physical descriptors and medical information, the clothing and accessories found on or near the body. And of course, we're wanting to collect those biometrics to be utilized for identification purposes. And again, just like in missing person cases, photos can be extremely helpful and can help to enhance a case. So having an image of a person's tattoo or jewelry may be the key identifying piece that sticks out to a missing person's loved one. And there are actually 3 components to the NamUs system. The missing and unidentified database are the most widely known and most utilized. But the third component is the unclaimed person database. And you've possibly heard earlier in the presentation me talking about unclaimed cases. So this database contains information about deceased persons who have been identified, but no next of kin have been located to claim the body. So similar to the unidentified database, only medical examiners and coroners can enter cases into this database, but it is searchable by anyone by name. So this database can also be very helpful for families and law enforcement. We had a family member enter their loved one as missing, who had been missing for several years, but had never filed a missing person report. And they entered the case into NamUs, and we received the information and searched the NamUs database and found the same name listed in the unclaimed person database. So we were able to reach out to the medical examiner's office handling the case, and they connected them with the family. So although it wasn't the outcome the family was hoping for, they were grateful to have answers on their loved one after all of those years. So we do encourage law enforcement and families to utilize this tool as well when working their missing person cases.
I want to take you just a couple of slides back. You don't have to go physically back to the slides, but there was a question regarding the tribal identification. Is that restricted to folks who are enrolled, federally enrolled, or enrolled in a federally recognized tribe, or can somebody self-identify as Indigenous? So that's actually a really great question. I might contextualize it based on your answer. So go ahead. What is the...
Sure. So I guess the 2 options that we have is to list if they're enrolled or affiliated. So those are the 2 options. So I guess I don't know if there's a self-identify option. Maybe you can help explain.
Yeah. So you're actually the researcher who asked that question, actually, and I can totally understand why that question came up, is because there are some folks who slip through the cracks, especially within enrollment. Affiliation sounds like that would be the appropriate place to put them if they self-identify, but I have a sister, for example, who's like 1/32 shy of enrollment in either of her nations, because there's like flat head blood in her quantum, and all of this stuff is the colonized system of identification, of course. So I just want to name that. But what that means is, so she's not enrolled Nez Perce, Tulalip, or Flathead because her genetically she's not enough in any of those tribes. So that being said, does the system, I hope, doesn't exclude those folks based on the blood quantum system, but it sounds like affiliated might be the place for their identifier.
Yeah, and we're entering that information based on the information that we're getting from family or we're getting from law enforcement. So if that's how they identify as affiliated with, then that's where I would put them if it was in my region.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
That helps. All right, let's see. I have a few more things on the database here before we get into the forensic services. Now I'll get into our advanced searching. So in addition to serving as a central repository for case information, there's also an advanced search feature which allows searching of any field in the NamUs database to develop potential matches to missing or unidentified persons. So I like to say, keep that in mind when entering your missing person. The more information that you have to provide in their entry, the more likely that it might show up in another person's search results. So the advanced search tools within NamUs make resolutions possible. Users can search for matching cases based on geography, unique physical descriptors like scars and tattoos, or even clothing, jewelry, and accessories. We've had public users report tips that connected cases based on something as simple as a backpack or a pair of shoes. Like I've said, I think already, you just never know what type of information is going to stick out to another person. So after performing a search, you can view your results in a simple list view that allows you to click on each case to view the entire case file. You can also switch to a gallery view, which displays thumbnail pictures of the missing or unidentified person, allowing you to quickly scan search results for persons who bear a close resemblance to the person that you're searching for. And finally, you can view in a map view, and then hyperlinks to specific cases are available within all three views. All right, so now I'm going to get into our forensic services. Unless Ty, there's any other database questions I can help with before we move on.
I'm just taking a look at the chat. I don't see any coming in. We'll just pause for a moment. Do any of you attendees have any questions about the database system thus far? Okay, doesn't look like anything's coming in, so go ahead.
All right, we'll keep it going then. Okay, so now I'm going to get into our different services, starting with our forensic services. The NamUs program provides free forensic services for missing and unidentified person cases, which include forensic odontology, fingerprint examinations, and DNA analysis through the University of North Texas. And of course, we want everyone to come home safe and to be okay, but we recommend to families and to law enforcement agencies that we work with to get these records collected and on file. So should they be needed, they will be available. And this will allow families to get those answers on their missing loved one as soon as possible.
A question came through just a second
Sure.
ago.
Yep.
Do you include missing children in this database?
We do, yes. So I know I previously worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and they are experts when it comes to missing children cases, but we do enter them into NamUs as well as another platform to get exposure to their case.
Excellent, thank you.
Yep. All right. So one of the great things about NamUs is our partnership with the University of North Texas. They are tasked and fully funded to process DNA on missing and unidentified person cases, and they enter all eligible profiles into the Combined DNA Index System, or CODIS, which is our national DNA database. So I am by no means a DNA analyst or expert, but I do want to provide you with some basic information that's helpful to know when it comes to missing and unidentified cases. So DNA, it can get a little confusing and overwhelming. I've been with NamUs for over 5 years now, and I still feel like I'm learning new things. So hopefully I won't lose anyone here. Bear with me through these next few slides though. So there are 3 types of DNA profiles to consider when it comes to missing and unidentified person cases. And in no particular order, I'll start with the nuclear DNA or STR profile. So this type of DNA is passed down to the child, either a male or female child, from both the mother and the father. So 50% from mom and 50% from dad. And the advantage of STR profiles and why they're used so heavily in forensic casework, like from unsolved crime scenes and convicted offenders, is that they are extremely discriminating. So the likelihood of 2 people having the same STR profile is like 1 in a billion. The downside to this type of DNA profile is that it might not be as easily obtainable from degraded or skeletal remains, which is oftentimes what we're working with unidentified remains cases. So the second type of DNA profile is the YSTR profile. So this type of DNA is passed down to only the male child and only by his father, and it follows that paternal line. So great-great-great-great-grandfather will have the same YSTR profile as great-great-great-great-grandson. Again, this type of DNA is not as easily obtainable from those degraded or skeletal remains, But the advantage of this type of DNA profile, let's say if you have a 1950s missing person case, male missing person case, there's still that option to get DNA from, let's say, a great-great-grandson and get that DNA searching in CODIS for searching against unidentified remains. And then the third type of DNA profile is the mitochondrial DNA profile, or MITO. This type of profile is shared along the maternal line, which means that a missing person will share the same MITO profile as his or her mother, who also has the same MITO profile as her mother, and all of her siblings from the same mother. Hopefully you're still with me. So one of the reasons mitochondrial DNA profiles are important in missing and unidentified person cases is because it is more resilient to degradation than the nuclear DNA. And this is due in part to the fact that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of copies of mitoDNA profile in every cell of the body, where there's only one copy of the nuclear DNA in each cell. So that's that photo there on the screen. So hundreds or thousands of copies of the mito, but only one nuclear, if you can see my little arrow there. So for every missing person case, it's critical that both mitochondrial and STR profiles have been developed for comparisons to decedents, and that at least 2 family members' profiles are searching in CODIS. And I'll go over that a little bit more. So I know this is a lot of info, but one of the reasons I do want to go over this is that we typically get a lot of questions on DNA, especially from family who is wanting to help. And if you didn't already know, family members can provide volunteer DNA samples to be uploaded to CODIS if a direct sample from the missing person is not available. And I'll use this diagram to walk through the family members whose DNA is most useful. So for STR profiles, it's important to collect DNA samples from at least 2 family members whenever possible for better searching in CODIS. And the more closely related the family member is, the better. And this diagram will reflect the relatives who will provide the best STR references for the missing person. So they include the missing person's biological mom and dad, any full siblings of the missing person, any biological children of the missing person, and then any half siblings of the missing person, although full siblings are preferred. And then for mitochondrial DNA comparisons, again, you'll want to collect DNA from a maternally related individual. So this would include the missing person's mother, siblings from the same mother, a maternal grandmother, and children of the missing, but only if the missing person is female. So this is because a female will pass down her mitochondrial DNA to all of her children, male or female, but only the female children will continue to pass down to her children. So, but if you're ever uncertain of which relatives you should collect from for a particular missing person case, never hesitate to reach out to me. I'd be happy to provide guidance based on the circumstances of your case and the available relatives. So I mentioned that mitochondrial DNA is so important on missing and unidentified cases. And the UNT Center for Human Identification DNA Lab is one of only a small number of laboratories in the country capable of developing mito DNA profiles for upload to CODIS. So other mito labs include the FBI, Minnesota BCA, California DOJ, just to name a few. So if you're utilizing the UNT laboratory, we can provide free DNA collection kits to the law enforcement agency, assisting with the collection. And this ensures that the proper documentation, collection, and chain of custody is provided on each sample collected. So we often get asked if family can collect on themselves, but unfortunately they cannot. It would probably make things a lot faster and easier, but it goes back to that chain of custody. All family reference samples must be collected by a law enforcement officer or other criminal justice personnel. So the process is a very simple cheek swab, and then the relatives must sign a consent form indicating their willingness to provide their DNA for searching in CODIS. And again, the cost for processing and everything involved is no cost to the family or to the agency handling the case. So we also get asked by family, how is my DNA being searched? What are you doing with it? And I understand that concern. So I want to make sure and share this information as well. It's important to understand that when profiles are uploaded to CODIS, they are not contained in one index where one profile is searched against every other profile in the database. Profiles uploaded to CODIS are stored in indexes which can and sometimes cannot be searched in specific ways. So the indexes most widely known and commonly used in missing and identified person cases are the missing person index, the relatives of missing person index, the pedigree tree index, unidentified human remains index, convicted offender index, and the forensic index. The one that we want to focus on is the profiles for family members can only be searched against the unidentified human remain index. This is because family members are providing voluntary samples and are providing consent only to use their profiles for the purpose of locating their missing loved one in CODIS. So for this reason, family member DNA profiles cannot and will not ever be searched against the convicted offender index, forensic unknown, or any other indexes. They are searched only against the unidentified index, like I said, for the purpose of locating their missing loved one. If a direct profile for a missing person is available, such as the profile developed from a missing person's toothbrush, it can be searched against all CODIS indexes in hopes of identifying that person. And finally, unidentified person profiles are searched against all CODIS indexes, which allows leads to be generated from multiple investigative avenues. So if an identified decedent could be associated with a family member of a missing person, or the remains could be associated to a known offender in the system, allowing that identification to be made. Okay, we made it through DNA. And like I said, I know it can be overwhelming, but I hope that there is family members with a missing loved one or any law enforcement agencies on the line listening, that information was helpful to you. I saw you pop up, Ty. Is there some questions?
No, there was a question. You kind of answered it, but I also want to dig a little bit deeper.
Sure.
I will contextualize the fact that I know that this is not necessarily your role, but it is part of the national consciousness around race and unidentified and undocumented relatives. So how safe are our undocumented Indigenous relatives using this system if there's law enforcement involved, if there's DNA? Of course, families are gonna have like their addresses, like ways to connect with them. Like, is it safe for somebody who's undocumented Indigenous person to look for a relative using this system?
Okay, so you're asking if someone else would find out the family donor's contact information?
I think it's just a matter of like, and I think that this, because of the national consciousness around like ICE raids, and that sort of like, that's kind of the direction this is going. Does law enforcement have access to, I mean, essentially use the data that's inputted for other purposes outside of finding missing relatives?
Sure, and I would say no. There are a lot of restrictions and rules in place for this to protect the family members providing their samples. And I think it could go as far as, our CODIS lab getting shut down if we would not obey by those regulations. So it's pretty strict.
That's fair. Okay, thank you.
Anything else regarding DNA?
Looking at the chat, I don't think any DNA follow-ups, any questions on DNA is heavy. I'm not a science person at all. So.
And one thing I like to, I forgot to mention is that with family reference samples, if at any time a family member decides they're not comfortable, they can request that their profile is removed from CODIS as well. So if they decide one point that they want to do it, and then at another point they've changed their mind, they can request that it's removed.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we will move on to our other forensic services, and I'll go through these a little more quickly, but they are equally important. So we also have a full anthropology lab, and they are available to accept human remains for anthropological review before DNA analysis. They can help in distinguishing if the remains are historical or modern. They can also help develop biological profiles and sometimes time and manner of death. They're also available to assist in comparisons and identifications based on medical and radiographic information. Right, so we also have fingerprint analysts on staff who can assist in locating fingerprints. They can also assist with coding for NCIC and NamUs entry and perform print comparisons between missing and unidentified persons. We also upload all quality prints to CAFIS, which is our internal APHIS program that continuously searches the prints of missing persons against the prints of unidentified remains every time a new print card is added. I like to note for family too is that, you know, even if your missing loved one is an adult, if you had a child ID kit or some other fingerprint that was taken even when they were younger, prints stay the same throughout their life. So if you have something like that at home, that can be just as useful for providing fingerprints on your missing loved one. And then we also provide odontology services. So forensic odontology is the use of dental evidence for personal identification. Dental radiographs, written treatment records, and other dental information can be uploaded to NamUs to be available to authorized criminal justice users and forensic professionals for comparison and identification or exclusions between cases. And one thing that I like to note here is that while DNA is wonderful, it can take several months to process, where fingerprints and dental records comparisons can provide a one-day turnaround for results. So if possible, remains are found for a missing loved one and family has to wait, you know, months for those answers, it can be really hard for them, if, as you can imagine, waiting for those answers. But if we have fingerprints or dental records, those results can be instant, giving families answers that much faster. So I always encourage the investigating agency and the families to try to obtain those records, as well as they're just as important. And also just to note, we do have a great relationship with National Archives, and through them, we can sometimes obtain dental records and fingerprints through military records. So if your loved one was ever in the military, please let us know. And there's also a place to list military information when you're entering your primary entry into NamUs. So now I'm going to move to our investigative support. And I mentioned earlier that I'm the regional program specialist for the state of Idaho, and Ty mentioned too, I also cover Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. So a big region up here. So if there's anyone on the call though, I did want to, that's outside of Idaho or outside of my region, I did want to provide the map so you can see the contact for the state that you are in. So I mentioned our headquarters is at the University of North Texas in Fort Worth, but all of the RPSs work remotely out of their region. So I live and work out of Minnesota. If I could turn my camera here, you'd see the snow falling. We're actually getting like 5 to 8 inches of snow today. So if anyone on the line is from Minnesota, I feel you. But I've been to all the states in my region, whether it's work related or for personal. I was most recently in Idaho in April 2019 for a conference in Coeur d'Alene. That was the only time I've been to Idaho, so hopefully I can make it back there once everything kind of clears up with COVID. But So although we're not all sitting down at our headquarters in Texas, all the RPSs are in constant contact with each other. So if you have questions on a case outside of my region, I'd be happy to connect you with whoever you need to talk to give you assistance on your particular case. So there are 9 RPSs, and we all come from different backgrounds. We have previous homicide detectives, we have DNA analysts. I actually come from the analytical world. I was previously an analyst, I mentioned, with NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And then I was also an analyst for the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office here in Minnesota for a couple of years before finding my spot with NamUs. And I've been with NamUs for a little over 5 years now, and I think I've really found my home here. I love this work that we're doing. It's very important to me and important to NamUs, and I just enjoy working with the families and working with law enforcement in hopes of bringing resolutions and answers to their cases and to their loved ones. So yeah, it's a great spot. But in my current role as NamUs RPS, I am the main liaison for all involved parties in my case, on a case in my region, whether it's working with the family or if it's working with law enforcement. I'm also there to assist with user registrations. I support case entries, so validating all cases and moving them to publication. And then once a case is in the system, I help to coordinate forensic services. And then I also field any questions that come in and forward any leads or comparisons to the investigating agencies. So NamUs also provides investigative support. We have analysts on staff who can consult on cases and provide assistance to law enforcement agencies to help locate missing persons. So using various data sources as well as advanced search techniques, our analysts can provide criminal justice agencies with searches for the missing person, looking for any indication of life or of death. They can also help to locate contact information for family members for that DNA purposes, for starting the collection and process of collecting DNA. And then they can also assist the RPS if they need help with any tips or leads that are coming in. They can follow up on any searches that they can do on any leads. And then finally, I want to talk about our Victim Services Unit, which is one of the newer units to NamUs and is available to provide support and resources to families impacted by the loss or disappearance of a loved one. So the Victim Services Unit is available to help connect families to needed resources. Staff can help link individuals to available support groups in their area. They can also provide referrals for those in need of mental health treatment. They're also developing a peer support network, which will be made up of volunteers who have been through similar experiences and are now trained to provide support to other families as they navigate this new world of having a missing loved one. They also have a reunification program to help lost loved ones return home. So this will include the exhumation of identified remains for reunification with family members. And they've already assisted in several of these situations where they, their loved one was buried as a John or a Jane Doe in another state even. And we've had the Victim Services Unit help with getting their loved one back to the family for a proper burial near where they live. So it's been pretty amazing to be able to give that to them. And then finally, the team is also developing outreach and education materials. This will include web-based resource guides for families and for law enforcement, and it should be available on our website soon. And then I just want to touch on our peer support network a little bit more. It's still in the recruitment phase, so we're still looking for volunteers to be peer supporters. And I bring this up in the chance that there is someone listening who has been through this, who has had a missing loved one, and who is now at a point in their life where they want to help others. And if that sounds like you, I do encourage you to apply to be part of this team. And you can reach out to me for more information, and I can get you connected with our Victim Services Division. So that's all I have for you today. I thank you again for joining me to learn more about the NamUs program. I know I covered a lot of ground, a lot of information, and I hope I didn't talk too fast. But I've provided my contact information here. Never hesitate to reach out over email or phone if you have any questions or need assistance with anything. You know, our hope at NamUs is to bring home the missing and give a name to the nameless. And if there is anyone listening today, if you have a missing loved one, I do welcome you to visit our website and get them entered into the database so we can provide our resources in hopes of locating them and bringing them home. Or if you're more comfortable giving me a phone call to start the process, that works too. I'd be happy to answer any questions and walk through, you know, things together. So thank you again. And if there's any other questions, I hope I can answer them for you.
Are there any questions, relatives? I'll go ahead and give you a minute. I'm going to rearrange some of my screens.
Sure.
So I can see all the things. In the chat, if there's anything that you want clarification on, please let us know. Q&A, I don't see any new questions at this point. So I will give that a minute and let folks kind of ruminate on it. Thank you for your presentation. That was very helpful. Half the trouble that we have in indigenous communities around finding our missing relatives is that we don't have access, nor is where would this training be available otherwise? So I'm glad that we were able to bring this to this conference, but I hope that if there are tribal advocates or tribal leadership that they can reach out to there. If they're not, we have a lot of participants from the Southwestern United States also. We saw that those numbers were high on your map previously. So I hope that they'll reach out to their regional program specialists and be able to provide this not only for their agencies, but for families as well. Because you're right, the families want to do something, We have an excellent question from Lena. How can they apply to be a peer support to help families? What does that application process look like?
Oh, sure. And I was going to provide a link for the application. Actually, if you just email me, I'll send you the application. And then I can also connect you with the victim services. So my email, I believe, is still on the screen there. Jessica.hager@unthsc.edu. Send me an email and I will get you the information you need.
Thank you. I didn't know that was a possibility either, having peer support. That would make sense. Great. That was the question that came through. And then there was something else that really stood out. There's a fear of partnering with government organizations to help us find our loved ones because of our, tumultuous relationship with government agencies over the last 400 years, right? So I can see why folks in the community would ask their questions about, are we safe using these systems? Is there like a governing or law enforcement agency attached to the system outside of these ones who are logging in and getting vetted, et cetera. So I found that very interesting also. So I hope one of our big takeaways today is, that the system is available and it's, from what I learned today, standalone from any law enforcement agency. Is that correct? That it's usable without fear of, interrupting somebody's life because they're undocumented, and I get, I have deep compassion for my relatives who are undocumented that would feel that level of fear. So we have another question for you, Jessica.
Sure.
You mentioned that a case on NamUs won't be published until and unless there is an official missing persons report with a law enforcement agency. What if an agency refuses to take a report? Or what if it would be too dangerous for a family to make that report? Would NamUs never make an exception?
Sure. So we do need that missing person report. I do encourage them to still enter the case into NamUs. Like I mentioned, it will remain in that pending status. But then I can at least reach out to the entering person, the family member, and talk to them about what their issues have been in filing a report. And I have different contexts in each state that I could maybe reach out to try to get assistance to help file a missing person report. And hopefully we could try to talk it through and see what the issues are and see if we could, how we could help and move things forward. So same with the DNA part of it. We do need the missing person report in order to take that next step with the DNA. And that's another reason why we need that, because the lab needs to respond to that investigating agency if there is ever an association or a hit. Does that answer the question? Or
yeah, I think it touches on it.
Yeah. So I encourage them still to enter the case. We do have analysts on staff if it would help to do some searches on our end to see if we could try to locate the person without that law enforcement involvement. So there are some things that we can try to do to help. So I encourage them to enter the case even without the missing person report. We can kind of talk through it and see what steps we can take.
Mm-hmm. And that's the difference between whether or not the case is public or not public, correct?
Correct.
Yep. Not necessarily. Okay, that makes sense. And that, that also speaks to the tumultuous relationship between law enforcement and some of our Indigenous communities, especially in rural places. I hear, we hear these horror stories of being unable to connect with our law enforcement agencies, to being able to get transparent communication about updates on the case. So it would make sense, for them to ask that question about how, can an exception be made outside law enforcement? And we're grappling with that, holding multiple truths that our work here requires both community-focused solutions as well as some level of partnership with law enforcement. But what does community accountability for law enforcement look like? So that's a question we have to grapple with for sure. We had one of our researchers ask a question also about the differences with law enforcement reporting and NamUs race identification. So a report that was published out of the Urban Indian Health Institute regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women told us, or illustrated, or even revealed that the Seattle Police Department was racializing Indigenous women as either Hispanic or Black if they couldn't get a clear read on their racial identification. What can we, and how, even if NamUs is even thinking of this, how does NamUs racially identifying folks or even encouraging law enforcement to racially identify folks in a proper way so that we can find our relatives?
Sure. And we get the information. So cases, like I said, can be entered by the law enforcement agency or a concerned citizen or the family or a family advocate. So we're getting the information by whoever enters the case. So if family is entering or someone close to the family is entering the case, hopefully we're getting that correct race or ethnicity listed. But if it's entered by the general public, that's something that I do like to follow up when I'm talking to family or law enforcement to make sure that it is entered correctly, because sometimes the general public's getting their information from, news articles or, other forums. So I want to make sure that we do have that correct information. And then when I talk to law enforcement about the demographic information, they're usually getting the information from the family, at least with these newer cases. I know I've seen with some of the older cases, I've had people contact me saying this race is incorrect or this needs to be updated. So I encourage people, if they see that in the system, if you're familiar with a particular case and we have something entered incorrectly, reach out to me and I'll try to make sure that we can update it to have the best information in NamUs.
Okay. Great, thank you. Do law enforcement agencies take this training also?
Yes, yeah, we do trainings all the time, all across the US. So things have been, like I said, a little limited with travel and everything right now. But yeah, we do trainings all the time across the US for NamUs.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm a decolonizer of time. I don't see any more questions coming through. I don't want us to forcefully fill up 2 hours if we don't need to. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with us?
I just,
Any
I
calls
thank
to
you.
action for our attendees?
Oh, I just thank you for inviting us to be a part of this. You had mentioned, you know, to be able to get the word out there so people know who NamUs is and what we have to offer. So I always appreciate being involved with events like this and speaking to the community and making sure that people know what NamUs can offer. And our main goal is to bring loved ones home, and that's give resolution and those answers to families. So if I even touched one person today that reaches out to me and we can help them in any way, then I think that it's a success. So again, feel free to reach out to me after today at any time with follow-up questions or anything that you need for your specific case or family member.
Okay, great. It's really great to have you. Thanks again. I have a lot of deep gratitude that you showed up for us today. This work is so complicated and it's heavy and it's emotional. And so all of the systems that we can use that are transparent and have some accountability mechanism are important in helping us address this work. So thanks again, Jessica. We appreciate what you're doing and what you're offering our community. I would like to end with a few reflections. We're going to end about a half an hour early today, which is totally okay. As a reminder, please double check your email for evaluations. We really appreciate that you give us this feedback to help us improve the way that we deliver this knowledge to the community, both as the coalition and then me as a storyteller and a facilitator. I always appreciate having that feedback. Again, I'm navigating this as a first. I'm trying to be a maverick in the way that we engage with communities. So this is new for me. And I love that y'all are my partners in this guinea pig of ours called the MMIP conference, virtually especially. Again, just as a reminder, please submit your questions for our law enforcement panel. I will again put that in the chat, the survey for you to be able to submit those questions. As of about 20 minutes ago, we have confirmed also the Coeur d'Alene Tribal Law Enforcement and the Nez Perce Tribe Law Enforcement to join us on that panel. I think I might have mentioned Nez Perce this morning. So we want as vast of a panel as we can to get as many of our community questions answered as we can, which is why we have four or five different law enforcement agencies represented on that panel. It is an opportunity for you to dig deep and ask hard questions. If any of you know me personally, I do not shy away from conflict. I actually lean heavily into it, especially when it comes to navigating why folks are missing, why we don't have answers, why the violence is perpetuated, the lack of transparency in some of these cases. So I will really push as much as I'm able to push in that conversation on Thursday. Tomorrow we are in hearing from Amber Alert in Indian Country. We're going to meet the woman behind that case and why that was legislated. I would also like to share with you on Friday, this is not associated with our conference, but the Sovereign Bodies Institute, also building a database around MMIW and MMIP, is hosting an advocacy webinar on understanding Savannah's Act. So it's a discussion on the advocacy itself by Sarah Deer and Mary Catherine Nagel. So that's on Friday. I would encourage you to look at the Sovereign Bodies Institute Facebook or their website to get more information about that webinar. It is relevant to the work that we're doing as advocates. It's relevant to the work that we're doing as community members addressing violence in Native American communities. And so I encourage you all to get that information as best as you can. And that's all that I have for this afternoon. Again, deep gratitude, Jessica. Thank you to our ASL translation team, to our closed captioner. Thank you all for attending today. I will see you virtually tomorrow at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. That is all.